Hello everyone. Today we are going to learn about Engati, which is an open multilingual chatbot to help power your customer engagement function. I'm Kinshuk from the product team of Engati, and I would be giving you an overview of the platform. So this is the portal where you can manage the complete life cycle of the chatbot, right from creation to deployment to training it on an ongoing basis, as well as viewing all data and analytics which the chatbot has accumulated. As you can see, you can have multiple chatbots for your account. Creation of a chatbot is very easy. You can go and click on this add new bot button, and you will see a window pop up where you can add the basic details for the chatbot. So let's give it a name, brief description. Also, you can set the category, and we have our own bot marketplace. So you can use any of those templates to build a bot. So as you can see, we have hundreds of chatbots across various domains and verticals, use cases, etc. So you can just quick start your chatbot journey with these templates. Right? I have a chatbot that I have created already for this overview. So first we will look at the deployment aspect of a chatbot. So as you can see, it is a open platform. We support multiple channels where you can deploy your chatbot, and the platform is a build once and deploy anywhere platform. So you don't need to make any changes, and we try to normalize the experience of the bot you have built across these messaging platforms based on their capabilities. So let's look at some of these channels and how you can deploy them. So Facebook Messenger is fairly easy. You just need to sign in with your Facebook account, and you can connect it to the page where you are an admin and you would want to connect the chatbot, right? Then website chatbot. So typically you would want to place your chatbot on your own website and help your customers or prospects navigate your website. So that is very simple to do. You just need to copy this script here and place it on your website and launch it. The rest of it is taken care by the platform, and it initiates a connection to the chatbot. Right? You can do some customizations like where you would want to position the chatbot, some other configurations if you want to restrict the bot to a certain domain, as well as you have a direct link to the chatbot. So even without deploying to your website, you can use it for trying it out, as well as it will function as a full-fledged chatbot that you can distribute also. You can customize various aspects of the chatbot, like its font, color, header, description, alignment, text, icons, and a lot of other things. Apart from the website, you have other channels as well, like WhatsApp. So for WhatsApp, we have partnered with multiple providers. So you can choose any of them and then configure or connect your chatbot to any of these. And other than that, we have Twitter, WeChat, Skype, Kick, Viber, Telegram, Line, as well as we have a native mobile SDKs for the iOS and Android platforms that you can embed in your apps and have the same ease of deploying your chatbot for your mobile apps. Each of these channels comes with a handy guide, so you can click on the learn more link, and that will take you to our extensive knowledge base where you can see the step-by-step instructions of how to connect it with your particular channel. Next, we will look at the build section, which is the most important piece of the portal, which you will use to build out your chatbot. So there are two key components of the build section. One is the FAQ and the other is the paths. So FAQ is nothing but automated responses. So this is where our proprietary NLP intelligence comes into play. So we have tried to simplify the user experience so that you can just add your questions to the bot and the bot will train on its own. And you don't need to worry about a lot of the NLP and machine learning aspects that goes on behind the scenes. So as you can see, I have already added some questions. So adding a particular question is fairly straightforward. You can categorize your FAQs. You can also support multiple languages, which I will talk about a bit later. Then you add your question like what are your store timings, and you have entity support which you can use to tag in the queries. I'll explain it a bit later. And the response, you can train the chatbot. So if you see here, a response type can be a simple text message or it can trigger a path. So paths are nothing but structured flows where you can do a lot of interactive stuff with your chatbot, including integrations, graphical elements. You can also perform calculations and logic. So we'll see that section a bit later. Another interesting part is you can also upload multiple FAQs at once and train the chatbot. So you have upload FAQ feature. So if you upload a CSV in the particular format, which you can get from the sample, the chatbot will just ingest that data and train, and within like hardly a minute or two, it will start responding to those particular queries. We also have some advanced capabilities. So you can configure your synonyms and stop words for your chatbot. So synonyms are nothing but, I mean, if you want to have, let's say, acronyms which are specific to your bot or domain or some key terms that can have multiple terms to represent them, or let's say some common misspellings. So you can use that. Also, the platform comes with an inbuilt set of synonyms for a particular language. So you don't need to worry about some of the common synonyms like, let's say, price and cost and things like that. So stop words are words that are ignored from the NLP processing, so which contains some basic words that don't add a lot of meaning to the user query that is coming in. So you can edit this particular list as well as add some common words which would basically skew your data set. So all that you can do from this workflow. Okay. Coming back to the main FAQ, so here I've set up some FAQs as you can see. So you can add multiple FAQs, and as I mentioned, you can categorize them. So if you have a lot of FAQs or you are trying to cover various use cases, they typically come in very handy to manage them better, right? So I'll briefly explain a bit about what goes on behind the scenes in terms of NLP processing. So during training, we take a look at all the questions and their responses. And first, of course, is the pre-processing where we would remove the stop words and punctuations and normalize the text, right? And then it goes on and we do parts of speech tagging, and we would identify the verbs, nouns, adjectives, and we would assign a certain weights to them. Alongside, we do other processing to sort of vectorize the terms or the queries which are being added, and then all that gets finally trained to the chatbot's model, and that is used for response, right? And when a user's query comes in, some of these steps are repeated. So of course there is pre-processing, there is parts of speech tagging, and some of the other things which happen are synonym resolution. So that happens real time when the query comes in, and that helps to resolve the query to the actual trained response. We also have spelling correction inbuilt in the chatbot, so that can help you to basically get to the right query if some terms are misspelled. So that can come in very handy, because typically we have seen a lot of users who would make spelling mistakes, right? Also, during the resolution, we maintain an internal context that can be controlled for the configurations. So you can manage that, and we would sort of maintain a stack of the common terms that are present. And of course, there are some other aspects to that, like entities processing and intent resolution, that would come as part of the overall query resolution parts. And of course, finally, the language or the multilingual piece. So whatever I told you is specific to a particular language, and all the algorithms, all the configuration parameters would be tweaked according to that language, and that helps the chatbot to resolve queries coming in from multiple languages based on the training that you have provided. Let's look at the entities part in a bit more detail. So here is the workflow where you can manage entities and create them and tag them to a particular type. So adding an entity is easy. You can give a name to it, and you can set the type of the entity. So as you can see, there are a lot of predefined entity types that comes packaged with the platform. So these will automatically resolve any values that are extracted from the user query based on the training. So you have date, time, you have date and time combination, URL, duration, amount, quantity, and a lot of other such relevant fields. Right? You also have custom values that you can use to define your own entity types. So let's say it is a set of products or any kind of values that a particular element or an attribute can take, and you would want to extract that from a user query. So once you have defined your entities here, you can go back to the FAQ section, and let's try to add an FAQ that has an entity associated with it. Right? So let's say, so I have added an entity called ticket ID. So let's say I want to come to the bot and check the status of a particular ticket based on its ID. So let's say, what is the status of my ticket number, right? And now what I will do is I will just select the relevant section and tag it to the particular entity. Okay, so as you can see, this gets automatically tagged, and these are some parameters that you can use. So required is when the intent won't be resolved if a particular entity is not found in the query. So in that case, you can also set up a prompt message that can you please enter the ticket ID. So if let's say the user comes in and just says what is the status of my ticket, so since the required entity ticket ID is not resolved, it will just ask the user this particular prompt that we have set here. And if let's say we haven't marked it as required, it will just proceed with the flow. And then we have this other parameter called reuse. So reuse is basically, would you want to reuse that particular resolved entity value in subsequent intent and entity resolution? So what that means is, let's say I come in and ask what is the status of my ticket number, this, and it figures out that this is the ticket ID. It will store it as an internal attribute, and let's say I want to add another intent, which is I want to cancel my ticket. So here, based on the same attribute ID or the entity ID, If it is set to reuse, it will automatically fetch that value and resolve the particular intent. Otherwise, it will either prompt the user or continue with the flow based on the required setting. Again, spending some more time on the multilingual pieces. So you can configure that from the configure section. So you have a specific tab for languages. So you need to enable the multilingual feature, and there is enough help provided for you to do that. So how it works is you can add a new language to your chatbot, and these are the list of languages that we support. So a particular chatbot can have up to 5 languages that it can support. And once you have added to that, all the paths you have built, of course, we haven't spent time on the paths, but all those keys would be generated here. And you will also be able to tag your FAQs for that particular language. So these were the languages that we had set for the chatbot, and you can associate your FAQ to a particular language. Right? Now later in the path section, we would see how we would associate the flows or the resolution to a particular language. So overall, there is a system attribute called user.language that is used to keep track of the user's language and then send out the responses accordingly. And if you can also set a default language, so if the user has not explicitly selected a language, responses from the default language will be picked up. And if they have set it up, then we would look at multiple languages as well, depending on how many languages you have set it up for. Right? So this was a bit about the NLP components. Now let's jump into the path section and see what it has to offer. So paths are nothing but structured flows that you can use to add more interactivity and powerful functionality to your chatbot. So when you create your chatbot, there would be some system defined paths that would be automatically created for you. So for example, the welcome new user, the greet returning user, the default message. And if you have subscribed to live chat, you will have a couple of other paths as well. So the welcome new user is the path that would be triggered first when a user starts interacting with the chatbot. So you can use this as a means to obviously greet the chat user, as well as provide some context and menu options to the user so that they can easily navigate around the chatbot and know what it is intended for. Next is the greet returning user path that you can use to customize the experience of the user when they return to the chatbot. And the next important path is the default message. So the default message is triggered when the FAQ is or the NLP engine is not able to resolve a particular user query. So in those cases, the default message will be triggered, and you can again customize the experience here in terms of what the chatbot can do. You can either trigger live chat, you can ask for their email and get the question and have someone respond them later, and a lot of other things like, let's say, creation of a ticket on the system so that that can be followed up and things like that. So so you can customize that experiences as well. And live chat will touch upon a bit later, and we will explain how that entire workflow works, so that you can have a very seamless interaction of the chatbot as well as the human agents or your customer support executives that you would have to manage the chatbot. Right? So let's take a particular path and let's see what are the elements that you can add to it. So here you can see I have added some nodes here. So nodes are sort of the building blocks that you can use to build up a particular path and eventually the entire chatbot. So let's see what are the nodes available for us to use. So here you can see some of the nodes are standard, like send message, which is sends a simple text message, send message with options, where you can send a prompt and have some quick reply options that the user can select. So those options can either be used to trigger paths or set a particular attribute. So for example, I have already set up a send message with options node in the welcome flow that we will see. Next is send carousel. So carousel is nothing but a sequence of cards where you can have even images and interactive buttons to those particular cards. So you can have up to a maximum of 10 cards, and you can also use attributes to generate the cards dynamically. So that's a specific array attribute that you can use. So in general, attributes are what we use internally to store the data or the context of a user's conversation with the bot. So it could be any piece of information that you can collect either from the user, or you can also use to fetch it from backend systems. And you also get some system defined attributes, for example, the current time, the user's channel, basically where the user is coming from, and a lot of other things like what was the user's last query. And based on these system attributes as well as the attributes which you can collect, you can do a lot of important things with the chatbot and connect together all these flows, right? So request user data is what you would use to collect attributes from the user, as we were talking about earlier. So you can just set up a prompt that can you please help me with your name or email ID. So also we have some custom defined validation types that you can use. So if it is password or number or a net promoter score on a scale of 1 to 10 or 1 to 5, emails, mobiles, and you can also have regular expression support. So if you have, let's say, a particular format of your data input, you can use that and validate the user input coming in. And of course, you can give the attribute name that you are associating with that data point. And you also have this update username field. So this is specifically helpful for website chatbots where the user's context is a bit anonymous. So let's say you ask for their email address. So you can use that as a primary identifier and have this check, so that it would update the username of that particular user, and you can refer to that or see them in the users list. Then you have trigger a path, so you can use this to connect all the paths and build out the entire chatbot. So this is helpful because let's say you have a menu path that gives you the primary options that you would want to select, and you would want to use this at multiple places in your chatbot flow. So instead of rebuilding the particular path multiple times, you can just have a particular path for the menu, and you can use trigger a path to trigger that particular menu options or anything for that matter. So you have a decision node that can help you to branch off dynamically based on, let's say, any of the attributes values. So you can set conditions here, and you have this predefined conditions like is equal to, not equal to, empty, and things like that. And then finally you can combine multiple conditions as well and give the expression. So let's say if I select user.channel is equal to website, right? And let's say I'm collecting user dot email is not empty. So basically I can say A1 and A2, and then I can connect this particular node, and you will see the true and false conditions that come in here, and those can be connected to other nodes. So maybe you want to trigger a path or send a message based on the logic that is computed from the decisions nodes conditions. Then you have multimedia elements like send image, audio, video. So these will send the elements to the chatbot, and of course there are some channel specific limitations. So in those cases you would the bot would send the URL of the particular element to the user. Then you have the randomized message node. So this you can use to randomize the message that is sent out to the user. So basically, when this node is encountered, you can set multiple messages here. So for example, I would just set it as ABC here. So what would happen is when this node is encountered, it will just pick up from one of these three messages that are set and send it out to the user. So where this is helpful is if you want to customize the experience and make it a bit more human like. So instead of just sending over the same response every time, you can have few variations of that, and then the system will randomize between them and send it to the user. Next, we have the identity node that can be used to collect information from the user or even log them into a particular system. So it is primarily helpful for the website channel, but you can use it for other platforms as well. Uh, so it has two modes. So essentially, it is like a window that comes on top of the chatbot. So you can also use it to get, let's say, the name or email of the users before they even interact with your chatbot. So it all depends on where you place this particular node. So you can enter the title that user information. So this is optional. As you can see, this has two modes, a data capture mode and authenticate using JSON, right? And also you have an option to enable skip or not. So let's say you don't want the users to interact before they have entered their name and email. So you can keep this disabled. Otherwise, you can enable skip so that they will see an option to close the window and proceed, right? So the two modes are so the data capture mode is fairly straightforward. You can just give the details of the fields that you are interested in, and you can define the name. And here also it has various types you can select, and you can use this for username. So since we are asking for the name of the user, and so I can use that to update the username field of the user. And the next thing I would ask is the email, and I can put email validations here. So this will also real time validate the user input that is going in, and I can again use this also as a username field. So what happens when you select multiple fields is it generates a unique combination based on these two fields to uniquely identify the user. Okay. So that's it. So when this node is encountered, the user will see a pop-up on their chatbot, which will cover the entire window, and you will see these elements presented where the user can enter the information and continue. So you also have this authenticate using JSON, where you can not only collect the information, but you can use that to authenticate or validate against a system as well. And that can be done via any of the, let's say you have a REST API to authenticate the user details. So you can enter the details here and then select which attributes you will use to authenticate, and then the flow can proceed forward, and you can have decision checks to sort of branch in case of authenticated users versus unauthenticated users. So that was the identity node. You also have the set user attribute node where you can explicitly set the values of certain attributes that you can define here. So you can select any of the existing attributes, or you can add a new attribute as well. And you can also define the type of the attribute and the value you want to set. So where this is helpful is, let's say you have designed multiple flows for your chatbot, and you want to tag the users based on what option they chose. Let's say it could be gender, it could be any of their preferences, and based on those settings, you can set that particular value, and so that they, whenever they encounter this node, these values will be added to their user context or will be updating the user context that is already set. Okay. Then next is the trigger live chat node. So this node, wherever this is placed, will create a live chat request, which the agents who are like taking care of your chatbot, they will get a notification and then they can respond from the live chat workflows. And then you have the script node. So this is a very important node because it allows you the flexibility to write custom code that will be executed during the runtime when the user is interacting with the chatbot. So this can be helpful for a number of cases. So let's say you make an API call and get some data that you want to post process, or let's say clean up the data or do some basic computations, etc. So all that can be very easily done here. So it supports JavaScript, and there are examples also given to help you set up those code snippets, and you can update attributes, you can even send messages or options or carousels via the response of the script node, and you have access to all the attributes that have been already set for the particular user. So this is really a very helpful tool that you can use to add more functionality to your chatbot. Next is the filter FAQ node. So as we saw earlier, the FAQs that have been set up, they can be categorized. So what the filter FAQ will do is, you can restrict the NLP engine to look at only these particular categories when it is trying to resolve the answers. So some of the use case where this can be helpful is, let's say you are building an internal HR chatbot, and let's say the policies or guidelines are different for different sections of employees or their grades or designation or whatever that may be, and the same question might respond with a different response based on those attributes. So what you can do is you can categorize the same set of questions based on the different categories, and then based on the category of user, you can either ask them, or you can make a backend call to check their status, and based on that you can navigate them to this filter FAQ node, where behind the scenes only these filters will be applicable, and those particular responses will be sent out rather than the generic ones. So that can be pretty helpful to segregate the responses and serve multiple sets of users in the same chatbot. Then you have specific nodes related to our automated campaigns feature. So you have two particular nodes, one to subscribe the user to a particular campaign, and the other to unsubscribe them from a campaign. And so you can basically build out flows and subscribe a user to a campaign, and based on that, that particular campaign will be triggered, and those messages would be sent out as per schedule. So we would look at campaigns in more detail a bit later. So then comes another important node, which is the select language node. So select language allows the user to set up particular language, and once this is encountered, the user.language attribute, which is a system attribute that we use to manage the user's language, that would be set, and that has multiple implications. So one is, any of the flow elements after that, they would be rendered in that particular language, and the other part is the FAQ lookup also will be particular to this language as well as the default language that is set for the bot. Right. So this can be, I mean, you can use it to present upfront when a user is onboarding to your chatbot or just starting to use it. And based on their preference, whenever they select an option, you can trigger this node. So this will behind the scenes set that language attribute for that user, and the messages would be updated for the subsequent nodes that are encountered or the messages that are sent out. Next is the set of integration nodes. So obviously, a chatbot without integrations would not be, it would be limited in functionality. So that is why we have built out significant capabilities on our integrations front so as to enable you to add more functionality to your chatbot. So the JSON API is probably the most important out of the integration nodes. So this allows you to connect to any of your REST APIs that would send out JSON data, and you can have either post or get or put and any of those API types. So you can update any data to your backend based on the chatbot interactions, or retrieve data from your systems based on, let's say, certain attributes or certain use cases that are encountered, right? So this is a simple client. You can set the API URL here. You have the parameters. You can set the headers. You can set up the authentication details. So we support key-based basic authentication and token-based. So it can also support refresh token or OAuth based systems where you would need to regenerate the tokens, and you can set up the flows that what happens if the API call fails. So whether to stop flow or to continue the flow after that. And another interesting part is once you make an API call from this client, you will see a response based on the API's response that is being sent, and from there you can pick up specific attributes and inject them to the chatbot's context. So let's say you are building an e-commerce chatbot and you want to get the order status, so you would ask the user for their order ID, and you would typically have an API to get the order status based on the ID. And once the API sends a response, let's say it has multiple fields for expected date, shipping methods, items, etc. So you can tap on that and select them and add those as attributes. So all of those additional attributes will be injected as part of the user's context, and you can use them in the rest of the flows to send the information back to the user. So you have other capabilities like you can upload a file, so the users can upload files for maybe screenshots of some issues or photographs or any files also. So that capability is supported. You can have native email and SMS capabilities. So SMS is powered by Twilio and Clickatel providers at this point, and we keep on enhancing this list. Then you have the WebView node. The WebView node is again a generic node that you can use for multiple purposes. So let's say Google or Facebook use OAuth based mechanisms. So where a window would pop up and the user will enter their details and a redirect callback would be made. So you can set all those up via the WebView node. So let's say, so there are some predefined sets that are created. So for OAuth we have Google as an example. If you would want to authenticate, so you would need to enter the scope, client ID, client secret, and other details, and headers can be set, responses can be set, and what will happen in case of error. So it is similar to the JSON API in this part. And it can also be very helpful to integrate with a lot of payment gateways. So here also we have standard support for Stripe. So you would get all these values from your Stripe dashboard, and you can decide what currency to use and what is the amount. So all these values can be attributes as well. So some of these could be preset for the bot, or some of these can be retrieved from the user or the flows where they would have navigated to. Right? This node can also be used to trigger a generic URL. So basically, a web view kind of a screen would pop up on top of the chatbot with the URL loaded up. So it is really a very helpful multifunctional node that can be used to achieve a lot of integration capabilities. Then we have some out of the box integration capabilities like Google Sheets, Google Calendar, Salesforce that people typically use for their flows. So let's take Google Sheets as an example. So you can connect your Google Sheets account, and once you have done that, so these are the various actions that are possible for Google Sheets. So you can add a row, so you can use it for, let's say, a very simple lead generation chatbot, or you would want to log the queries that are coming in. You can also use it to look up a particular row. So let's say you have a Google Sheet that has a lot of information. So based on the user's inputs and the attributes that are set in the context, you can do a quick lookup on a particular Google Sheet and then get the results back as attributes again, that you can use in your subsequent flows. And also you can update a particular row. So based on the sheet and the elements that you would want to look up, you can update the particular value of any of the columns that are available in the sheet. So it is very dynamic. It will check the sheet for all the elements that are present and will allow you to set up the flows based on that information. Similarly, you have Google Calendar, where again you can connect your Google account, and it will automatically search for free slots and then schedule a particular appointment. And there also you have options to set up based on the time zone or the time duration where you would want the appointments to be set up and things like that. Another powerful capability in our integrations set of features is the Zapier integration. So Zapier, if you have not used it earlier, is a very powerful tool for managing integrations via simple GUIs. So you can connect up to 1,000 plus third-party applications via Zapier. So we have created some templates for some of the common use cases when a Zapier integration would be helpful, especially with respect to a chatbot and the use cases what we have seen. And based on that, you can connect to your Zapier account. So you need to basically enter your API key and other authentication details, and you can send in attributes to the Zapier workflow. So whenever that node is triggered, it will update Zapier workflow, and then the subsequent third-party API would be called to complete the workflow. So this was a very high-level overview of the paths capability as well as the nodes. We saw the various nodes and how they can be interconnected with each other to give a lot more functionality and capability to your chatbot. Now that we have seen how to build a chatbot and add rich capabilities to it, let's look at some other aspects of the platform, starting with configurations that we provide. So these are some of the basic setup information for a bot. So each bot is identified by a bot key or a bot key identifier. So this is typically used for, let's say, calling the APIs or integrating with Zapier. So just note down where to find it if you find a reference to the bot key. Right. The other details are fairly standard, so you set the bot name and description while creating. You can update them also at a later point of time. And you can set up the bot time zone as well, which is used as the default in some of the scenarios where time calculations are involved. Right. Then we have a bunch of configurations for the conversations or the response part of it. So first is you have a minimum response threshold score. So when the NLP engine computes the response, best response to be sent out by the bot, it takes into account a normalized score that ranges between 0 to 1 and decides whether to send it or not. And so you can customize what is the threshold for the system to send out a response. So if you want the bot to be more conservative and only respond if it is a very close match, then you would set this value higher. Whereas if you would want the bot to respond to, let's say, if it finds even anything remotely similar or fairly close, you can set it to a lower value. Right? Another thing that you can configure is whether to consider the answers data as well when the system is resolving for the best response. Right? And another important thing is the show related matches. So when you enable that, so the normal behavior of the chatbot is it would send out a single response based on the user query, which is the best match. But sometimes you might have multiple responses that would be quite close to each other in terms of their scores. So if you would prefer, you can set the show related matches to yes, and you can set up the prompt that did you mean to ask any of the following, which is the default. And you can also configure the maximum number of responses that would be shown and what is the deviation between each of the responses, basically their scores, so that that is used as a filter criteria to determine the actual number of responses that are sent. Then you have contextual responses. So we spoke about it earlier in the NLP section, that we maintain a context of the key terms that the user's query had, basically, and we use that to refine the FAQs and find the best response for subsequent queries. Right. Then there are some settings related to entities, and you can also block the text input when, let's say, the options are presented. And you can also preset a delay for the responses. So let's say you want to add a think time and make it more human-like. You can probably add a 1 second delay or a 1.5 second delay, and a typing indicator would come up based on the channel to make it appear as if a human is typing. You can also enable the spell check or disable it to your comfort. And we also have a debug mode that is provided by this link. So when you have trained your chatbot for the FAQs and intents, so you can see this to try out various combinations of the user query and look at in more detail that how does the NLP engine resolve the particular query. So, for example, it would give data around whether spelling correction happened, or whether synonyms were matched, or what was the threshold which was identified, and more information around that. So that the NLP or NLU engine does not seem like a black box to you, and you can get more insights on how it actually resolves a particular query. We already saw about the languages section earlier, so you can easily add multiple languages to the bot. And once you have done that, for a new language you would download the keys. So it is nothing but a properties file of keys and their values or the messages that are sent. So all the parts where user facing messages are present, they would be mapped to a corresponding key, and you can translate and change them for each of the languages and upload it back. So just make sure that you don't remove any key, or you have translated all the keys and values that are present in the file and then only upload. Otherwise, you might see that the messages default to the default language in case a particular value is missing for a key. You can also request automatic feedback for the bot's responses. So by default, it is turned off, but if you turn it on, after every intent resolution, this prompt will come up that did this answer help, and these are the two options that will be presented to the user, the positive and the negative, and you can customize the text here. And the other good part is you can also configure what happens on the positive path as well as the negative path. So basically where it would be helpful is, let's say the user selected no, it was not helpful. So there are multiple things you can do. You can probably trigger a live chat, so support executive can take care of that query, or you can log it as a email, or let's say add it to Google Sheets, and that data you can use it to train the bot further, or just to keep a overall track of the efficiency. And the positive path can also be customized accordingly. We also have voice capabilities that are supported on the bot. So on website bot as well as WhatsApp voice notes, we support this capability. So you have to set up speech configuration files. So we use Google voice services here. So there are instructions provided. You can set up your credentials and update your account, and then you will have voice capabilities on top of the chatbot that you have built. So these were some of the important configurations. Now let's look at the live chat feature. So the live chat feature, we already saw the trigger live chat node. So that is kind of the entry point of a live chat request, and you can place it at relevant positions in the chatbot flow, so as the user always has an option to reach out to a human or the support team as such. So it could be, let's say, provided as a menu option. It could be part of an option in the default message path when the bot was not able to respond, or as we just saw, it can be part of the user feedback negative response, or anywhere else as well, depending on how you are designing your flow, right? So here in this live chat section of configure, we allow you to customize a lot of behaviors in the live chat functionality. So if you would want the live chat to be 24/7, or you can set the working hours based on your team, and you can set the time zone here as well. If you check this, automatic email will be generated for every new live chat request that is coming in. And also for the agent side, you can define how many agents, or rather how many users can a particular agent simultaneously handle. So this value is used to determine whether the agents are available or not. So one is, of course, each agent can set their own availability status, and based on the conversations they are handling, the system computes that whether the overall queue is occupied or a new request can be handled. And based on that, you have the messages that can be configured. So this is the standard message, the transition to live chat. So the default is thank you for your request, an agent will attend to you shortly, and this can be customized based on your bot. And if the agents are unavailable, you can customize the message, or you can also direct them to a different path. So all the flexibility is provided to you. Now, in the live chat workflow, which we'll see a bit later, you have an option to resolve the chat. So let's say the human handled the chat and closed the user's request. They can mark it as resolved explicitly, and after that, this particular system-defined path will be triggered. Right? So that can be used to customize the experience post customer support executive has resolved the chat. So you could probably collect a feedback or thank the user or things like that. We also have auto routing capabilities. So you can set some parameters here that always prefer the previous agent, or reassign to a different agent in case of a delay. Otherwise, it will just automatically route between the set of available users that are currently present, and then handle the chat request accordingly. If not, all the conversations will go into the new request section, from where all the agents will be able to pick up the particular request and respond to them. Would come in when the agents are actually interacting with them. So this is the workflow. So on the left side, you can see all the active users. So currently there is only one. This is the main section where the agent can reply to the conversation. And on the right hand side, you can see the details about the user, like their username or joined on or any other such system attributes, right? So the user can just type in here and respond to the end user. So let's say, okay, so irrespective of the platform or channel where the end user is coming from, the agent will see the same screen and they would be able to respond from here. And once they have responded and resolved to the queries, you have a button here for mark the query as resolved. So once you do that, the user will get a message based on the post resolution path, and the bot will again be activated. So during the time the agent is actively interacting with the user, the bot will be automatically turned on so that there is no confusion between the bot messages and the agent messages. You can transfer your chats to other agents. You can switch the bot on or off. So let's say it will take you some time to get the response. So meanwhile, while keeping the chat active, you can switch the bot on so that they can continue the interactions, and you will get a real-time update on the screen. And finally, you can download the chat transcripts as well. Let's look at the broadcast capabilities of the platform. So as you can see here, there are two sections. One is for basic and the other is for automated campaigns. So let's look at this first. So broadcast or push, basically you can send out a message to multiple users at once. So of course there are channel based limitations on which channels allow you to do that and what kind of permissions you need, and when can you typically send out bot initiated messages which are not part of a reply as such. So keeping all those constraints in mind, you can set up a broadcast. So you can give it a name, let's say promo update. So you have various types of a broadcast. You can either send a message, or you can send a message with some options which the user can tap on, or you can trigger a path as part of the response. Sorry, the broadcast. So the path which is set up will be triggered here. So once you have set up the values here, you can choose to define and send it to a particular user segment. So a user segment is defined on based on attributes and a combination of them. So you can define segments from the user's workflow that we will cover a bit later. Right? Once you have done that, you can set up the target channels where the broadcast would be sent. So if you can see here, most of the channels are grayed out. So there can be two reasons: that either the channel has not been configured for that bot, or the required permissions are not available. For example, for Messenger, you would need to explicitly get the permission for the page to send out broadcast. So if that is not present, then you will see the channels as grayed out. Also, you can set up a schedule for the broadcast messages. So either you can send the messages right away, or at a particular time, or even at a periodic manner, let's say daily or weekly, etc. So you can set up the time and date from here and then publish it, and it will come up in the list of published broadcasts. So as we saw earlier, you have draft, published, and processed. Then finally, coming to campaigns. So campaigns are defined as automated sequence of messages that would be particular to a particular user and relevant for a particular use case. So keeping those two combinations in mind, you can define what kind of campaigns you should subscribe a user to. So I have set up a sample campaign here to re-engage users who, let's say, have added a particular product to cart but have not completed the purchase. So we would want to basically send reminders to them at particular intervals and trigger them to complete the purchase process. So let's look at how the workflow would look like. So inside the campaigns, you can set up multiple steps or messages. So each message is basically comprised of either a simple text message or a path. So as you can see, this is the first step of the sequence of messages in the particular campaign, and you can schedule it immediately. So since this is the first message, this will be triggered as soon as the user is subscribed via the subscribe campaign node that we have seen earlier. Or you can set a particular delay. So in this case, we have put a delay of 5 hours, and you can also select that. I mean, if you don't want to send the messages on a particular day of the week, you can select and unselect these from here. So we will keep that to all days, and we have defined a limit of 5 hours as the delay. So what will happen is, as soon as, let's say, the user adds element or a product to a cart, we can subscribe him to this particular campaign. And what will happen is, now let's say the user hasn't completed the purchase. So exactly 5 hours from that time, this particular message will be triggered, right? And if you look at the next step, so this will be triggered at a delay of 2 days from the previous step. So the sequence is this, right? So if, let's say, the user have still not purchased, they will get a message after 2 days from the previous message. So this would be the sequence. Now, meanwhile, let's say the user completes the purchase. So what you would need to do is simply unsubscribe the user from the campaign, so that the pending sequences or messages would not be triggered because they would not be relevant for that particular use case. So you can use this capability to sort of add more engagement factors to your chatbot, even when the user is not very actively chatting with the bot. So till now we saw how to deploy a chatbot, how to build a chatbot and add automated responses and utilize the NLP and NLU capabilities of the platform, as well as a lot of other capabilities like integration, authentication, then multimedia elements via paths, etc. Right. So, and finally, live chat and broadcast and automated campaigns. So now we would look at what happens once all this is set up and your bot is receiving active users. So we have number of dashboards, we have some insights which the system springs up, and then finally you can get to know who are the users who are chatting with the chatbot, as well as look at the attributes associated with them. So let's look at those aspects. So first is the conversation section. So we saw it earlier in the live chat part, but here you can see all the active conversations that the bot had had. So irrespective of whether it was a live chat or not, you will see all the chats here, right? So this didn't have a lot of activity, but as you can see, you will also see the attributes as well, like when did the user join, or what was their email if you would have specifically asked, and when were they last active, right? And you can see here that the particular conversation was automated with bot. And you can also download the user details corresponding to this particular user. Then one of the significant capabilities of the platform is the easy way in which you can train it on an ongoing basis, right? So this is the training workflow. So you can filter the queries by date. You can also filter them by whether a response was found to the user query or not. And if you would have turned on the user feedback that we saw earlier, you can also categorize them whether the feedback was positive, negative, or was not set. So, based on these, you will see a list of such responses, and so it gives you certain important information like what was the exact user query that was asked to the bot, what was the closest match in the response set, and what was the answer the chatbot resolved and gave to the user, and the feedback response as well as the score it used to determine whether to send it or not. So as we saw earlier, the score would be a normalized number between 0 to 1. And another interesting thing is you can trigger a live chat directly from here. So if let's say I can see that here the fallback message was shown and the bot did not respond with a proper response. So I can just take a look at the conversation and actively chat with the user right from here. And then finally the training section. So the question will be automatically set for you, and you can update the other parameters like the language and category what we have seen in the FAQ section. You can also tag the entities as required, and then you will have three sections for determining what will be the response that will be set against this query. So the close matches is right now there are no matches, but if let's say the system had certain candidates for the match, they would start showing up here so that you can just tap on one of them and train the chatbot. Otherwise, you can also search your existing set of responses either based on the messages or by their path names, and it would spring up the list of paths and you can select one of them. Also, if you don't want to train it based on any of the existing responses, you can add a completely new response altogether. And here also you will have the option to select a message type or a path type, and then the answer section can be updated accordingly. And after you have done that, all you need to do is add. So let's say I give an option here. I can just click on add, and the training will be done in real time and the bot would start responding to those query. And if you can see, it is highlighted that this particular query is trained. So if multiple people are using the chatbot, you can just distribute amongst yourself and see that okay, this has already been trained, so you wouldn't retrain it again, right? Then we have the user section, which will highlight the users who have been interacting with the chatbot. So it will again show some basic information about the user, and from here also you can trigger live chat, or you can disable the chatbot if there is a particular case, right? And once you go in, you will see the list of attributes. So these are the system defined attributes for the user, and then these are the custom attributes that have been defined. And you can also see the conversations and interactions data over time and most frequent messages. So since there has been no activity, so you see this blank, otherwise you will see a pattern of trend basically of how the user had interacted with the bot, right? So another important thing you can do from the user's workflow is you can create segments. So segments we have seen earlier, we can use it in broadcast. So there are some custom filters that are defined, like new users or all active live chats or things like that. And also I can create a custom filter So basically here also, similar to the decision node, I'll be able to set conditions, like for example gender is this or this attribute value is this, and based on that I will create a filter and I can name it something, and then I can use that particular segment for broadcast. So then we have a set of dashboards that provide insights on the interaction levels of the user. So this is the engage dashboard. So it will give you a trend of the new users against active users. And then basically you will, so if your chatbot has multiple buttons, so you will see which of them are clicked more in a period of time, and which are the most frequent messages that the bot is receiving. Right? So then this is the responsive dashboard. So this is used for primarily the FAQ part, that how good is the responsiveness of the chatbot, and the training part of it. So you will see the total interactions, the total questions that were asked, and how many of them were answered and how many of them were unanswered. So you can tap on any of them and that would take you to the train window with the appropriate filter set, and you can use this section to quickly train the ones where no response was sent, right? Then you have the support dashboard. So this is primarily for the live chat capabilities. So here you can see the data based on agents and their respective categories, as well as you can drill down by dates, that how many incoming chats are there or how many resolved chats are there, right? And you have the retention dashboard as well, and it will give you the retention statistics of your chatbot, that how many users are coming back to use the chatbot on a regular basis. So you will see a percentage starting from the day of their first interaction. So these are some helpful data and insights you can see from the dashboards as well as the conversations and user section. So finally, let's look at the portal user section. So for an account and obviously a complex bot, it is difficult for a single person to manage the chatbot, make sure that all live chat queries are replied to, as well as look at statistics. So for that purpose, you can add more people from your teams to manage the chatbot, or even as live chat agents. So how you can do that is you can invite a user and you can enter their name, email, and we have specific roles. So you have administrator, executive, bot builder, and a live chat agent. So based on their roles, they would have access to only limited capabilities on the platform that they will be able to use them. So that was a fairly high level overview of the platform. I tried to cover major aspects of what all can be done from the platform, what all capabilities you can add on the platform. So hope it was helpful, and if you need any help or are facing any issues, you can reach out to support@engati.com, or and we also have a set of professional bot builders and conversational designers who would help you to build your own chatbot. So you can access that from this Get Professional Help section. So that was it from my side. Hope you found the overview helpful, and looking forward to all of you building engaging bots using the Engati platform.